So to just kind of introduce this session, hiring and getting hired, we're going to walk through the recruitment process from 3 different perspectives. I'll let you introduce yourself.
Sure. Hello, everybody. My name is Brian Royer. I am a recruiting coordinator within the People and Culture team at Howard Hughes Medical Institute, Genea's research campus in Ashburn, Virginia. And I'm fairly new to Genea. However, I've been in the HR field for the past 12 years. I've worked for Duke University, SAC. Prior to that, I served in the United States Marine Corps. And so if there are any veterans in attendance, thank you very much for your service. This is my first time at ABRF, so thank you very much for the warm welcome. And yeah, thank you for having me, and we hope you enjoy our session.
And I'm Laura Lewis-Tuffin. I'm the manager of the Cytometry and Cell Imaging Lab at the Mayo Clinic in Jacksonville, Florida. And in this session, I will be speaking from the role of the hiring manager.
And my name's Kym Delventhal. I'm the Director of Molecular and Cellular Genomics at HHMI Genelia, and I'm going to show the perspective of the candidate. So with that, we'll get started. So again, our agenda is we're going to highlight multiple perspectives from the candidate, the hiring manager, and HR, and walk through the recruitment process, highlight candidate documents, tips for interviewing, talk about behavioral-based questions, and then evaluating candidates.
Okay, so as you can see on this slide details the recruitment process overview at Genea, but you will find that other organizations and institutions may not follow exactly what's listed here, but again, you can expect to find some similarities within the hiring process. As you also see, there are many steps contained within the recruitment process. As a HR recruiter coordinator, we see each step within the process as an opportunity to work collaboratively with the hiring managers to make sure we provide a level of support that's required to attract and identify top candidates and to ensure we run a fair and equitable, effective search. I provide support with developing a recruitment plan, screening candidates, and conducting on-site interviews, and extending offers all the way to onboarding. But in the next slides, we will walk through the different perspectives in the hiring process, sharing some best practices that hopefully help you to better understand the recruitment process overall and how to get hired in the age of automated resume screening and behavioral-based interviewing.
So as the hiring manager, you're going to want to obviously put together a job posting to attract your candidates, right? One thing that's important to note, both from the hiring manager's perspective as well as from a candidate's perspective, is that you may have some constraints on what you're allowed to say in your job posting. They are not always representative of what the actual job will be. For several reasons. One is that it may not be practical to detail everything that the job is about. Another reason might be that there are institutional constraints on what you're allowed to include in your job postings. And something that we certainly discuss a lot in the ABRF context is the problem of institutions that don't have core specific job categories and career paths, right? And so they're reusing job descriptions that are applicable maybe to basic science research, but really not appropriate for what we do in cores, but nevertheless, that's what the hiring manager is required to put out as their job posting, right? So for those reasons, job descriptions and postings may not actually be representative of what the job actually entails. For this reason, if you're an applicant, it can be very helpful for you to contact the hiring manager if that information is included in the job posting or you happen to know the hiring manager, to find out more about the job, make sure you understand what the job really is about. That will help you tailor your application materials.
And to add a little bit to that too, if, of course, sometimes it's difficult to contact the hiring manager or to know who the hiring manager is. So I highly suggest, reach out to somebody within recruitment on the team. They're going to be your best source to get in touch either with the hiring manager, or they can tell you a little bit more about the position itself. So definitely encourage you to look into something like that.
So the next question will be, as far as your job posting, are you asking for a resume or a CV, and what is the difference between those two things anyways? So a resume has a standardized format, and it's maximum 1 to 2 pages. And it's really just a condensed version of an applicant's qualifications and experience that are most relevant to the specific job. In contrast, a CV, the format and the length varies very widely, but you should be keeping it concise. But it is a comprehensive document that shows a full range of an applicant's professional life. So CVs, because they're more comprehensive, tend to be preferred by employers where the job requires expertise in a very specific field, such as the medical field, science professions, legal, academic, essentially the ABRF sweet spot, right? In the ABRF context, it may not be obvious which one to use, and especially if the job posting doesn't specify if it should be a CV or a resume, it probably is okay to include either one of those. So if it's not stated, you're welcome to probably include your CV because it will give you a more full picture of what your qualifications are. I did, for this presentation, query some of my industry friends to find out if there is a preference for CVs versus resumes in industry. And the answer surprised me. So I was expecting them to tell me, yeah, definitely resumes all the way, right, because it's business. Actually what they told me was, well, to a certain extent, it depends on whether it's a sales position or an application scientist position or a service engineer position. But in most of those cases, it was people who were in academia and in science positions transitioning over into the industry, the business position, and they don't have skills that are an exact match for that job position, right? So their resume isn't going to look great, but their CV provides a better picture of maybe soft skills and other experience that's actually a decent match for the job as a scientist, application scientist, or a salesperson, right? And so they all told me, yeah, actually I submitted a CV. So that would be the CV versus resume discussion.
So as a candidate, if you're starting a new job search, it's important to refresh your documents. I recently, in the last couple of years, started a job search after nearly 20 years, and so I wanted to figure out what is the new format of resumes. Those seem to be changing frequently, so just a suggestion to go online and look at, there's lots of different formats that can help you organize your information, templates, things like that available. Make multiple versions of the documents to see how your information fits best and how you can make it concise. Definitely make it visually appealing, don't have any typos, proofread. There is sort of a trend of putting a headshot on some of your documents, so consider that if you're comfortable with that. But importantly, remember that anytime you're interviewing with people at different organizations, this document is going to be shared with everyone, and everyone's going to see that. So it really is important to take time and update that. And then the information on this document should really be relevant for the job that you're applying for. So customize that so that the skill set you have, the experience you have is really relevant for this position you're applying for and the needs that they've described in their job description. Put the most pertinent information up front so they don't have to search through it to find it. So if that's reverse chronological order, maybe your most recent experience at the top, that just helps the hiring manager connect with your information fast. Previously, we would put our full mailing address. You can put just a location these days. It's a good idea to use a professional email, probably not your work email, a personal email, but make sure it's not a goofy one. that you use for fantasy football or something like that. So, maybe take time to make a free personal email address. And then on cover letters, just importantly do this. This is really your chance to introduce yourself to the hiring manager and really customize this to say how your experience can help address the needs for this role. There's templates, again, online to help you build the structure of a cover letter and go through multiple versions of that till you feel comfortable with it. Have a trusted colleague read it, proofread it, check the grammar and all of those kinds of things.
One thing we did want to say about cover letters is that we've been talking a lot about AI in this conference. If you use AI to write your cover letter, there's a couple things to think about. So one of those is, of course, AI tends to write things very generically, and so that might not be the best way to represent yourself. But the flip side of that is that you don't want AI to lie about yourself. So when I was on the train over here, I was talking about this session with somebody who's attending this conference, and he told me a story of a recent recruitment that they did where they had 2 applicants that they interviewed who had submitted cover letters with their materials stating that they had direct experience with the technology for his facility. And when they got to the interview process and he was asking more information about their experience with that technology, they said, no, I don't have any experience with that. So it was put in by the AI generator that had written their cover letter, and they hadn't proofread what that generator had written. And you had...
Yeah, and to add, a good recruiter can normally screen a resume in about 10 to 15 seconds, but the opportunity to write a cover letter tells your story and how you connect the roles, the responsibilities, the requirements of the position, and then really, what are you passionate about that job? Why you? What separates you from all the other applicants? So absolutely recommend doing a cover letter to separate yourself from the pack.
So throughout the application process, if you're doing a large job search, you're likely going to encounter multiple application portals. So a lot of places will have these software systems, and you'll need to create a login to enter your information in there. You're probably going to input some of the same information that's already on your documents, but importantly, still include your documents. Don't skip the step where it says attach and upload. It's helpful to make PDF versions of your documents so that the formatting doesn't get messed up, so it looks as you expect it. You can also combine the resume and the cover letter into one document and upload that. So just some things to keep in mind there.
So when it comes to applicant tracking systems, first of all, not every employer uses these, and it can be hard to know which ones do and which ones don't. And some of the information now that we're going to tell you contradicts a little bit with what we've told you already, which was format your resume really, really nicely, your CV, et cetera. If you do want to think about the fact that they may be in use and prepare for them so that you're not accidentally screened out by an applicant tracking system that can't read your documents. So you want to do things like use common resume headings like summary and work experience and education and skills rather than maybe more flowery language or unique language that the applicant tracking system may not understand. Definitely, you want to put keywords from your job description, into your cover letter and into your CV and resume, the exact keywords, so that the applicant tracking system, if it's screening things, is going to find what's actually in the job description. So just as an example, if the job description wants proficiency with Excel and PowerPoint, you don't say proficient with Microsoft Office products. A human is going to understand those are the same things. A robot screener does not understand that those are the same things. You want to limit icons, graphics, and tables in your documents because the applicant tracking systems cannot understand what is conveyed in these. And then also think about the fonts that you're using. Some are easier for applicant tracking systems to read than others. For example, Arial, Calibri, and Verdana are a lot easier to read than the serif hand black. Definitely only use black color because it stands out really well. I also did find some conflicting information about whether you should upload PDFs versus only Word documents, and then the Word documents I saw conflicting information about whether they should be .doc versus .docx. So I think it's a little bit of a minefield that is unfortunate.
And I've had the opportunity to work with about 5 or 6 different applicant tracking systems. At Genelia, we have our ATS is Workday. We don't utilize the AI portion of that where it's screening applicants for us. We pride ourselves in reviewing every applicant that applies. However, the system does pull out your years of experience. It does pull out, ask about 5 different questions on the application that will kind of highlight why you're interested in the role, your salary requirements, stuff like that. And I do want to mention too, I make a recommendation. AI right now, if you see jobs posted on LinkedIn or some of these other career sites, I highly recommend going to the actual site where the organization is doing the hiring from and applying from there. So what we see a lot of times is people will apply through LinkedIn or through another career site. However, their resume and information don't feed over to our applicant tracking system appropriately. So we're not capturing the full potential of that candidate, and we might skip right over them if we're spending 10 to 15 seconds reviewing those resumes. So again, if you see something, go to the website, do some digging, and that's when you can also reach out to the recruiter to learn a little bit more about the position, but apply to it. You can apply to it from LinkedIn, but also I highly encourage going directly to the website.
Okay, so you have successfully submitted your application materials and they're getting in front of the hiring manager. What the heck is the hiring manager actually looking for? So basically the hiring manager is looking at your materials and trying to answer these 7 questions. And if you've written things well, the hiring manager is going to be able to get this information in about a minute. And that might sound scary if you're not a good fit, but you know what? If you're not a good fit, you're not a good fit, and they need to just be able to move on, right? If you're a good fit, they're going to pause and then look further at your materials. So the questions the hiring manager is asking, what are you? Are you a technician? Are you an administrator? Are you a salesperson? Are you a fireman? What are you? Do you have experience in my industry? How senior are you? Do you have experience with our tools and equipment? Do you have a degree? Do you have industry-specific certifications? Are you local? And then, can I afford you? And this last question is not something that's going to be answered by your CV or resume because we don't put salary requirements on that. But if you've been through any kind of phone screening to get to this point, that information may have been passed along. And that is also something where there's a little bit of a tension between the applicant and the hiring manager. As the applicant, you want to hold off on answering that question as long as possible. As the hiring manager, you want to know that information as soon as possible.
Okay, so preparing for interviews as the candidate. So a lot of times an initial interview from a recruiter will happen over the phone. This is really to gather your interest. One of those questions is likely going to be, what are your salary expectations? Well, why are you interested in this role? Just sort of general background, and sometimes a few technical questions. So have some of that information prepared when you have that phone call scheduled. And then likely there's going to be a Zoom component to it. Oftentimes kind of the next phase after you've gone through a phone screen is doing a Zoom interview. Good practice is have a dedicated location to have that meeting without interruptions. Make sure you have your camera on and you think about your background and your lighting. Give yourself time to make sure your technology is functioning, your camera and your microphone and your speaker, because you really want to have the opportunity to have a good interactive conversation and not have 5 minutes taking up fiddling with those things. And importantly, prepare responses to typical interview questions that might be happening during that next phase. And then finally, thinking to in-person interviews, which is typically like the final stage of the process. If you get an agenda, if you're going to be meeting with lots of people, review that, kind of think through who you're talking, what questions you might have for them, and be ready to talk about your experiences and have concrete examples in mind. Illustrate the outcome of a situation and kind of say how that impacted something or what was the output of that situation. One method to think about is called the STAR method, which is describing a situation, the task, the action, and the result. And if you can frame some of your experiences, maybe a difficult situation with a colleague or how you overcame a hurdle in the lab, and frame it in that sort of STAR method, that will get your mindset ready to answer some of these questions. And then importantly, as a candidate, prepare some questions to ask the people that are talking to you, because that shows that you've been really thinking ahead.
And I'll add to that too. That's what we like. I highly encourage. A lot of times we'll have people who interview who do not come prepared with questions, and so if you may have some of the best experience in education, but if you're not engaging with others and can communicate effectively, and then also really show that you're passionate and interested in the position itself, which is a way to do that is to ask questions, then you'll likely not make it to the final stage. So research has consistently shown that structured interviews yield more accurate and reliable results than informal, free-flowing interview approach. So we tend to do a structured interview approach. At Genelia and then across in academia where I've worked, do the same process. So a structured interview approach, of course, also creates a fair and equitable interview process for the candidate, because each candidate experiences the same questions in the same process. So at Genelia, in preparation for the interview day, hiring managers prior to the actual interview day identify competencies that are important to have to perform the job. We use Korn Ferry Leadership Architect, a global competency framework that identifies 37 different types of competencies that a manager can select from. And then within those competencies, we have behavioral-based interview questions, which we integrate into the interview day, and we assign each of the interviews questions to ask. Normally, once we assign those competencies, I'll put together an interview guide and interview tips so that everybody's prepared to ask those questions. And then if we can move to the next slide, where it talks more about interviewing with competencies. So the first thing is that, of course, the manager will decide which competency resonates with them the most, what competencies are important to have to perform the job. So if we look at communicates effectively and collaborates, on the next slide, this is an actual example of the behavior-based questions. Some of you, I don't know if you've been introduced to this yet, but the behavioral-based questions allow interviews to gather information about what candidates have done in the past to predict how they will act in the future. So past behavior is generally a good predictor of future performance. It makes sense. Competency for communicates effectively. If a manager chose that, the definition in Korn Ferry is developing and delivering multi-mode communications that convey a clear understanding of the unique needs of different audiences. So that standard interview question that you might be used to is, how would you rate your communication skills? But what we will ask as a recruiter and the hiring manager, or what advise the manager to ask, is the behavioral interview question, which is, tell me about a time when you had to communicate the same information to different audiences and had to vary your style for each. And again, for collaborates is a competency-based question, or the definition in Korn Ferry is building partnerships and working collaboratively with others to meet shared objectives. Makes sense. The standard interview question for that is, have you collaborated with others on projects in the past? And the behavioral interview question is, tell me about a time when you built strong relationships where none previously existed. So again, going back to what Kym said on the other slide, is using that STAR method to really, we want to understand how you got from point A to point B and what part did you play in making those decisions, and because that will speak to the competency that we're really rating you on.
So just to give you a couple more examples of this, where you would be asking the candidate to describe scenarios in which they use the skill that you're trying to assess. So for example, if the skill is conflict resolution, you could ask, provide an example of when you had to say no to a group of people and how this was handled or executed. Skills are flexibility and customer service, definitely core-based skills. Give an example of when you had to prioritize duties and how you decided to do that. Another skill, very important in cores, is autonomy. How best do you like to interact with others? What kind of environment do you like to work in? Now, we did collect a bunch of examples of this, more than we could put into this talk. So if you're curious and you want some ideas, feel free to reach out to us afterwards.
So in addition to those behavioral-based interview, the questions that we asked during the interview day, we often advise managers and others participating in the interview process to ask structured follow-up probing questions. These are helpful for gaining more insight into the candidate's strength or experience on a particular competency. So what that looks like is, for actions, if we look at that, you may hear somebody ask, how did you approach it? And how did you do it? Can you explain it more in detail about how you went about approaching something? For thinking, can you explain your thinking? Why did you select that approach? Why did you choose to do it in that way? What was the result? What was the outcome? What was the impact of your decision-making process? What did you take away from that experience? If you weren't successful in it, did you learn from your mistakes, or what would you do differently, knowing what you know now? And then describe a time when you used those lessons in a different situation. And so again, we really want to get down into the details of trying to understand somebody's thinking about how they actually performed what they said that they were doing. And so that better helps us select them, or to meet the qualifications of the position we're looking for to fill.
So as a hiring manager, we have some tips for you for success in your interviewing process. One of those tips is that you actually prepare for it. Don't wing it, even no matter how many times you have interviewed people. Resist that temptation. Actually review your job description. It may have changed over the years, right? Actually look at the candidate's resume. What is the interview guide that HR may have provided to you, etc. Do all of that well in advance. Budget your time. Consider the fact that other people may also need to interview with that candidate, and have questions that they've been asked to evaluate for you to help you out. Decide well in advance who's going to assess each of those competencies that you've decided are important. And then make sure, of course, that you leave time at the end of each of the interviews for the candidate to ask questions, because this is a two-way street. They should be interviewing you as much as you're interviewing them, right? They need to learn if it's a good fit for them. Stay neutral and be consistent. Make sure you're listening. Stick to the structured interview approach as much as possible. And of course, there are a bunch of questions that we are legally not allowed to ask or answer, both. So make sure you're not asking those questions. Again, HR should be providing you with a reminder of what those questions are that you're not supposed to be asking. And then take notes so that you're not relying on your faulty memory after the fact when you're going back and looking at all of the different candidates that you interviewed.
So, of course, interviewing is a two-way street. Walking into an interview is nerve-wracking, but it's also an incredible opportunity for candidates to learn about the organization they're interviewing with and the specific role they're interested in. So, of course, as much as we're interviewing the candidates, they're evaluating us. We share a realistic expectation of the day-to-day responsibilities. It helps the candidate to understand this role, what the role is, and what it's responsible for, and how they fit in with the larger team. Quite often, this is done during the phone screening process to make sure that they truly understand what a day-to-day looks like in that role. So they're coming into the conversation with a more higher level understanding of the role, but we dig more into part of the intake session that I have with hiring managers, asking what does a typical day look like, so that we're making sure we're lining up from the very beginning the expectations of the candidate with what the requirements of the role are. And then be honest and thoughtful. So when sharing opportunities or challenges of the role, be truthful and thoughtful in the feedback you provide. As an example, is this position monotonous? Is it focused on a core set of day-to-day responsibilities that impact the larger team? Are you a core of one? Or do you work within a shared resources center on multiple projects on the scientific and operations side? And, digging more into explaining and being upfront about the responsibilities and that the job entails is very critical. And then be prepared to speak about your experience. Candidates often ask questions focused around the benefits and challenges of a role and what you like about working at your institution. So take time to think through your responses to these common questions in advance. I will say real quick, just another tip. If you've made it through the phone screen and you're ready to, in preparation for your on-site interview, reach out to the recruiter and ask them follow-up questions of how best they think that you should prepare, be prepared. They will give you that feedback if you ask for it, so that you can come better prepared. Is this me as well? Oh. I feel like I'm talking a lot. So of course, we want to create a positive candidate experience. It's a job seeker's market right now, and how we treat candidates can be very impactful on the talent we are able to secure. One thing at Genelia and a lot of the other places that I've worked on is we provide white glove type of service. So we are providing service not only for the hiring managers from opening and posting a position to extending an offer, but creating that candidate experience. Because if they make it through our door and they have a great experience, but they're ultimately not selected for the role, they're more than willing, or they're probably willing to apply to other positions that they are a good fit for, and they've already been vetted through the system or our organization. So there's a good likelihood that we will call them back. There's a few ongoing searches right now where that's happened, which if they had such a great experience, they reached back out to me and saying, how can I get there? So again, creating that positive experience, providing timely feedback, reviewing resumes and responding candidates' application in a timely manner. I pride myself in that. It's very difficult to decline or reject a candidate, but providing that feedback in an honest and transparent way is critical. Again, it builds trust, and then maybe we can hire them for a different role. And providing a realistic job preview, and then providing a prospective employee a realistic view of what the job entails and what the work environment looks like. Sharing challenges and opportunities. It's okay to come to the interview with questions about what are some of the challenges you're facing and what opportunities do you see moving forward. And then share what to expect during the interview process. So there are many rounds, as you can see, throughout the interview process. Part of the phone screening, typically I will go through the entire interview process and set the expectations from there, from the screen to a Zoom call to on-site interviews. So clearly setting those expectations sets everybody else up for success at the end.
So after you have finished all of the interviews of your candidates, you're going to need to make sure that you have gathered internal feedback. Sometimes you may have a scoring system that you've asked people to consider, but just remember that that doesn't always give you insight, right? A number is just a number. So make sure you follow up with whoever has helped you with interviews to get more context about the conversations that they had. Make sure you reach out to everyone who did contact the candidate because you don't know what small or large thing they may have observed that's important. And also then remember that this is a subjective process, which can make it feel uncomfortable, and you are going to have to weigh several viewpoints in making your decision, and that's no matter how much as scientists we might want to be able to just quantify everything, this is one time where that's not possible. You want to be careful of rushing to judgment. So if you have got some kind of candidate evaluation form that was created ahead of time, that can be very helpful to allow you to add a little bit of less subjectivity to the process, right? Because it will be a place where you can write down notes during the interview process, or during or after the interview process, and give you a way to capture your overall impression of the candidate. So that can be a very helpful tool. And this is an example of one that Janelia has, which actually has a 4-point rating scale for specific categories. We just wanted to provide one way that this could be done. And then also important is for you to gather external feedback about the candidate. So this means following up with the references. And here, of course, it's really helpful to actually get honest feedback from the references about what the candidate is like. So to do that, give them open-ended questions and prompts, comparison prompts. So for example, on a scale of 1 to 10, low to high, how do you rank this person's ability to interact with others, right? How does this person rank as a percentile compared to others you've worked with in a similar context? So somebody who's inclined to just be positive about everybody may actually only rank that person as a 80%, right? Even though they've said, yeah, this person's great, right? What is your impression of their scientific skills, particularly in the technology that you're actually interested in? And would you rehire this person is a really great question to ask. And if you have contacts in their technology network, you know somebody who actually knows them, don't hesitate to reach out and ask for their candid opinion. As a mentor of mine said, asking is free. So you have finally found the candidate that you really would like to hire, and now you need to think about making the offer. So as the hiring manager, things that you're going to have to consider are salary expectations for the candidate, what their start date might be, are they likely to request relocation expenses, and is that something that you can provide? Are there contingencies that HR needs to help you with, such as a background check or verification of degrees? Is there a drug screen? Sign-on bonuses? Working arrangements? Have they requested to be fully remote when the position actually is in-person or a hybrid arrangement? You are going to also need to work with HR about fair and equitable pay. If you want to say more about that.
Yeah, so most organizations, they will look at internal equity with people within similar positions to come up with a competitive salary market range for the candidate. So we won't pay, even if you have a lot of experience, and let's say hypothetically you want 6 figures, but you're coming into a role at the job level where somebody has the similar experience but makes the pay band is a lot less than that. We will look at internal equity to make sure that we're paying people fair and equitable across the department. So we have a compa ratio that we use to basically gauge what we're paying or what we could potentially offer for salary for somebody that we want to extend an offer to.
As the candidate, when you're ready to consider the offer, certainly salary is the big one, but also health benefits, the package, the full package that you'll have at your as an option for you. Paid time off and sick leave, those things are important. Paid family leave or holidays, and certainly retirement. Sometimes those things come into consideration later, and we're usually focused on the salary number, but those are important things. And then additional benefits like other on-site access to wellness and gyms and things like that. So, and with that, we wish you success in your hunting and hiring, and thank you for attending. We're welcoming questions.
And discussion. So please come to the microphone if you have a microphone. There's one in the back and one here.
Hi, thank you very much for this presentation. I wanted to go back to the job posting that was at the beginning of the presentation, and how the job posting is written by the HR from the hiring organization. This is about changing the industry branches. I used to work for the retail branch, and I used to work for Apple, for Tesla, on products. I used to work as a translator, and there is a huge problem translating my skills into something that could be used at an educational organization or somewhere for research. I am an administrator at the University of California, San Francisco, and administrators are needed everywhere. But my skills simply weren't translatable just because of how the job posting for the job that I have right now within UCSF was written. And to be honest, I had a friend who already worked at UCSF, and he happened to be good friends with the head of HR. And that person was lovely, and she helped me translate my resume literally word by word, even including changing my name, because I used to use a nickname for myself, to the point that it would align with the lingo of my educational institution. And if it wasn't for her help, I wouldn't have had any chance. Because when I was on LinkedIn and on Indeed and on different job boards, if I see a job description that I thought that, you know, that the name of the job would potentially match my skills. If I see the description, you said contact the hiring manager who posted the description if you don't know what it is about. If you need to find a job because you have to pay your bills, you send a number of resumes every single day, and simply if I don't understand what is in the job description, I just skip it. And I go to the next one and to the next one. I worked as a data labeler for a long time. To give you an example, I would annotate sentences like, I would like to order a large pepperoni pizza. And I would use pizza, and I would annotate this as dish, pepperoni as ingredient, large as size. That's a very simple example. I also did much more involved work that, you know, needed a better judgment, deeper judgment. But just from this, you can see that I would have judgment, analytical mind, speed, prioritizing. Ergo, she would probably make a good administrator. Not translatable to educational lingo whatsoever. So this is my first problem, that there is this huge wall in the first step, which is read the job posting and judge whether you could fit. And again, if I didn't have inside help, obviously I've been there for a couple of years now, so obviously I had the skills that they were looking for, because otherwise it wouldn't work. But still, without that inside help, I would still be not there. So how would you approach that? The fact that the retail skills, even though very similar to what educational institutions need, are just not translatable to their lingo in this first step, which the job posting is. Thank you.
So thank you you sound very resilient, and thank you for sharing your story. I think, you know, at Genelia specifically, we use a platform called Texio that helps engage more diverse talent using inclusive bias-free language. So it provides, like, when we go to post positions, it will provide suggestions to remove like corporate cliches and how we can reach a broader audience. and appeal to a broader audience. I think you're just from my perspective, this is just this being in this field for quite some time. You did everything that you were supposed to do. As far as it's hard to some of these applicant tracking systems and the requirements change. They're so different from organization to different companies, and you really do have to fine-tune your resume to meet the skills and the requirements of that position, and it's hard to translate those skills sometimes. And so reaching out and building those connections with somebody who has that knowledge of how to do that and how to translate, that is a bonus. And going back to that cover letter, that's an opportunity too for you to share your story. So I always say this, the number one thing when I was recruiting at Duke, I'd see brilliant people apply and never get a call back. And I would always say to them, what are you doing to take yourself out of that pool? What else are you doing? You're applying to the position, but are you making those connections? Are you bridging that network? Are you trying to see, like what you did, to find somebody who can help translate those skills to highlight your skill set, to get you in touch with the right person? Because believe it or not, I mean, we have, I don't know on average at Genelia, but we could receive hundreds of resumes for one position. So what are we doing to separate ourselves from that? Pressing the submit button on the application process in addition to that. They're all very important. But that cover letter is important as well, in building those connections and utilizing your resources to make yourself stand out, which it sounds like everything that you've done. So I don't know if that helps from my perspective, but.
Well, go on, we have a long line here.
Yeah, so I want to thank you for giving this nice overview and also the different points of view, because I think the evaluation form is something that we could implement as well.
Yeah.
We don't have that. I also wanted to add, because I'm from the Netherlands. I work as an operational manager in a Stockholm facility. We have a large core, so we have trained 300 users each year. So giving training and presenting for a large group of people is something that we find very important. So what we added to the interview part is that if they will continue after we approve their CV and cover letter, they will go to the second round, and we ask them to give a small presentation.
Mm-hmm.
And we also include our team members, so
Mhm.
they can also connect with the person that is interviewing, because they directly have a feeling with the person if they also will be a good member of the team as well. So I wanted to add that. Oh, sorry. Did anything? So wow, this is loud. I don't know if everyone heard what I said, but I think it would be a nice additional thing to let someone present if that is something really important.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good example of a behavioral type interview approach. Yeah.
Hi, I'm going to ask a question from the hiring manager's perspective. You mentioned assessments that you can do during the interview process. I was wondering what would be an appropriate assessment for a core position, core scientist position. For example, would it be appropriate to actually have them come into the interview and have like a hands-on test or a take-home test? I've actually interviewed for jobs in other industries where I was required to do a 10-page proposal to be considered for the job. Engineering friends I have a paper test. They have to fill out equations and stuff to show that they're competent. Could you give any examples of what would be appropriate to ask, other than just one-on-one interviews where you're asking them questions, but they can actually demonstrate their competencies?
It's interesting because we actually have this going on, or the thought of what to do when evaluating candidates. It definitely happens early on in the process because you want to create that fair and equitable process. So whatever you do for one candidate needs to be done for all of them. And then also, depending on, it would take a conversation. I don't have it, because I'm fairly new at Genelia, I don't have a specific example of what they've done in the past. Just speaking from experience, you'd have to be careful about what you're evaluating, making sure it doesn't go outside the scope of if somebody's coming on site and they're performing in front of other people, the taking into consideration the stress that could provide for the candidate, the environment, and what are you rating? But yeah, absolutely, from the very beginning of the process of the intake meeting, coming up and establishing an evaluation in addition to, the behavioral-based questions is perfectly reasonable, just creating consistency throughout that process.
I think that's very similar to what she was just talking about, training is a very important component of that particular job, therefore have the candidate demonstrate what is their training process like, what are their teaching skills, right? And as long as the candidate has sufficient, knowledge ahead of time that this is the expectation for the interview, which creates the fair and equitable process, right, for all of the candidates, that can be reasonable. But the question is, you have, as the hiring manager, have to prioritize. You can't test absolutely everything they're going to be doing, right? So what is the most important skill that you need that person to be able to do on day one, right? And then how do you test that? And if you think that a 10-page proposal is the appropriate way to test that, then you ask them to write a 10-page proposal. If you think that a 15-minute, talk to demonstrate their teaching experience is appropriate, it would really depend on your particular core and what your needs are.
Thank you.
Let's take a question in the back.
Oh, thanks. I'm going to your last slide that says thank you. Are thank yous not part of the interview process anymore? As an interviewer, I expect a candidate to thank me and my staff for the time and effort that we put into the interview, but we don't seem to get them. So is that something in the room that just has fallen off the list?
I want to comment on that. A couple years ago, I was on the job market, and I did send out thank yous to everybody that I had interviewed with, and I had somebody write back to me shocked that I had done that, just absolute
So
shocked
they don't do
and
that
almost
anymore?
angry that I had done that.
I more or
Most
less
of our
expect
candidates
it when
say
I
thank
spend an afternoon with candidates, saying thank you for seeing me, whatever. And back when I interviewed, I did it. So that doesn't happen anymore?
It really depends. Sometimes I think the ones who are extremely interested in the role will say thank you. And that's what I've run across. I have had those who came to the interview day and then left, and I didn't hear anything from them. But following up and following through speaks to their credibility as well. So I don't think we're in a day and age where communication is lacking, and sometimes things are changing a little bit. But it is, I think I've seen it at both sides. Sometimes I don't hear from some people. You would expect a thank you after you
So
put
this
forth the
lady
effort.
just commented generational.
It could be generational,
An older
absolutely.
candidate, would they give a thank you, and a younger candidate not?
Yeah.
Or-
Yeah.
And sometimes it's through an email, and sometimes it's through, more formal process. Absolutely, it's another opportunity.
Absolutely.
I think also, I would put cover letters also in the thank you bucket, and that's one of the reasons we stressed them in this talk. The younger generation just does not write cover letters, and it is a way for the younger generation to distinguish themselves. The fact that they would even write a cover letter, yeah.
I have one other comment too. In this post-COVID where we have in-person, hybrid, and remote, several jobs don't post what it is. When you go through the whole process and then a candidate comes up and said, I want to work remote,
Yeah.
does that then end the whole process, or how do people feel as far as if that's your person, working with them for a schedule that would work, or do you just feel as though they have not told the truth along the path?
Yeah, it's very important within the job description that we clarify what remote
A lot of
means.
people don't, yeah.
Yeah, and when they don't, as a candidate, we want to ask that question. Hey, I saw that this job posting says remote, whereas, it might have been like you can work remote 2 days a week and on-site 3 days. So you're right. What we're finding out is a lot of these job postings are very inconsistent.
Yes.
And so, and we have 4 to 5 generations in the workplace. And so we all have different communication methods and everything. So it's on us as applicants, if we were looking for a role, to ask those important questions to those recruiters. What does a typical day look like? Do I need to be on site? I see that this is remote. You know, does that mean 2 days a week, you know, on site and 3 days remote, or is it fully remote?
Now, would you say to firm that up during the interview process or after you have an offer?
Oh, no, well in advance.
Like
of
at the initial phone
the
screen,
initial phone screen.
have that conversation and get
That's-
that expectation.
The part of a typical phone screen lasts between 20 and 30 minutes, but within that, I'm covering, you know, what does a day-to-day look like, but also setting the expectations for this is on-site or this is fully remote type thing. From the very beginning, set those expectations.
Speaking from the point of view of a hiring manager, a couple comments and a suggestion. One, I am going to put in another plug for the cover letter.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
I like to see them, and also to the candidates, be specific. I see a lot of cover letters that say, I'm the ideal candidate for this
Yeah.
position with no follow-up. Like, I want to know why. And to that point, we recently hired an administrator out of a retail job. Resume did not stand out. In her cover letter, she mentioned that she had gone back to school for her MBA, and we all thought, that shows ambition.
Yes.
Let's bring her in. Is the best idea, the best hire we have ever made, ever.
Yes.
So cover letter. Skill analysis, and we don't make people go into the labs, but we will present them with a problem. Client comes to you with X molecule to do this. Tell me how you walk through it. And that tells us what their thought process is and also what their skill level is in terms of what you're thinking about, how you interact with that client. Suggestion, we also do structured behavioral interviews, and I'm wondering if it would be useful to put a list of questions and rubrics up on the website for ABRF members, both for hiring managers to take a look at, and if you're looking for a job, what might be coming your way.
Great
Yep.
idea.
Yeah.
We have a long list already that we've been accumulating, so.
Yep, thank you. That's a great
Hi,
idea.
sorry.
Go ahead.
My question is for the recruiter. I'm sorry, I don't remember your name.
Oh, Brian.
So our institution use Silk survey to collect references. And it used to be that we would receive a complete report. Then it went down to we just get the summary, and now we get nothing. The recruiter reviews the report and tell us, okay, no red flag, we're good to go.
Yeah.
I'm wondering if this is a general practice. No. I mean, I see you doing that, so I said.
Oh, no, I'm thinking back to actually, so again, each organization is a little different. When I was at Duke, we did something with skill survey where it was just like that. We collected the feedback. You know, it was a responsibility of the recruiter to, you know, as long as everything, there weren't any red flags to consider moving forward in the process. At Genelia, you know, again, we have that human contact. We're actually phone screening them ourselves, asking the probing questions, going more into the details of asking about specific projects or deliverables that the candidate produced while they were at a company. And then we provide that feedback and a summary of that feedback to the hiring managers. Because it's very important for them to see that feedback and for them to feel comfortable with moving forward if there are any questions out there. So I wonder if there's an opportunity there to, although it's the practice where you currently work, I wonder if there's an opportunity to reach out to the recruiter and say, next time I want to see the feedback that's coming back into
Yeah,
the
they're
candidates.
I mean, our recruiter is fantastic, but
Yeah.
they're very strict about that because they think it just,
Bias. Yeah.
And so, you know, over my career, I've hired a fair number of people, and I would say it's 50-50. I've not find the perfect way to get, you know, success rate. But when a candidate is not working out, going back to the references when we were allowed to get it, you can read, you know, in there's 3 ways to improve, or you know, there's little something there that actually we should have paid more attention to. So I found it very useful, actually. But
Yeah.
okay,
Thank you.
so it looks like it's our institution.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
I have a relatively easy question. I think I might already have my answer, but I just wanted to kind of nail it down. So I find myself at this crossroads every time I'm going to list the references. And so, you know, I am in a situation where I may have had someone who was my boss who had not quite as much visibility on my day-to-day, but someone I was working with very directly who does. And based on all this feedback, I would think, let's list the person who I worked with directly, but historically, I've listed the person whose name is bigger.
Yeah, the key is, what we require is at least one supervisor or manager, and then the rest can be, coworkers or, so it's really up to you, and the requirements of, your organization, what they're looking for. But I can understand there are some people who are hesitant if we're applying for a position and we, don't want our current supervisor to, understand, know.
Well, just even that, how does it look to see that, I've listed someone, I could, like, in this situation, I'm fortunate that I had a direct supervisor, I can list them, but let's say I was in a situation where I didn't. Does it make sense to list someone who I just worked with every day?
Yeah.
Or, okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, anybody, yeah.
There we go.
Yeah.
Easy.
Yeah.
Kym, is it okay if I ask a question?
Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks, Ken.
So we talked a lot about, great talk, a lot of great components. One of the key questions in any interview, and I'd appreciate feedback for candidates as well as for what the hiring manager is listening for. Tell me about yourself. How do you answer, and what do you listen for in that answer to that question? Because it's always in the interview, right?
Yeah.
Any feedback on that? Let's hear it.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you should be prepared as a candidate with that conversation. Like, say that out loud to yourself several times, just like if you were rehearsing for a talk or something, so that you're not stumbling on your words and that you don't forget important things, because, it's definitely a nerve-wracking situation. But I would prepare those type of answers and highlight your experience for sure.
I agree. That's one to prepare for. And you can answer that in so many ways, right? I'm a native of Massachusetts, and that tells you nothing about my skill set for this particular role, right? Or I can tell you about my education, which may or may not tell you my suitability for the role, right? Or I can give you a specific example about something that I just accomplished in my position that does tell you about my suitability for the role. So it's definitely a question to prepare for and think about really what's the information that you're conveying, and what is the hiring manager trying to figure out about you, not just
Right.
the hiring manager, but all the other people that you're interacting with. What are they trying to learn about you? What should they learn about you? What's the most important thing for them if they remember nothing else about you? That answer to that question.
And I'll add that that's the first question I ask in a phone screen. And what I'm looking for, it's not only important during that. Again, take all different phases of the recruitment process very seriously, because speaking with a recruiter, I can't tell you how many times when I ask somebody to tell me about themselves, they just think that they're qualified and they should move to the next round. But how you interact and your response to that question matters, because it's my job to make sure that you're a good fit for the role. Not only skills-based, but are you going to be a team member and work collaboratively on the team if that's what that requires? We honor and we value values at Genelia. And so you may have all of the skills in the world and can perform the job well, but are you the right fit for the culture and for what we're looking for on our teams? And so I listen for that when somebody's responding.
I just have a quick do's or don'ts about something you said kind of logistically, which actually surprised me. Many of us are in niche roles where we have very specific skills and we have academic colleagues across a country that we know and people kind of rotate through. Can you talk to, I know you said talking or asking a colleague is cheap or free or something like that, or safe, but are you allowed, I've always heard, I think from our hiring managers or HR, but then there's been like it's iffy whether you can or you can't. Can you call a colleague and ask about a person if that colleague across the country has not been listed as a reference?
I'll let him
Yeah.
give an official answer. I personally think it's really a potential gray area, a problem, right? Because you don't know, does that person who's not listed as a reference, are they buddies with the supervisor of the candidate?
Right.
And the candidate has not told their supervisor they're applying, and so then that information gets back, right? So I included that because that was part of the discussion that we had internally with another colleague when we were preparing this, but it is definitely risky, and I'll let you answer.
No.
No, okay, sure, good. Okay, I'm glad to
No.
hear that. And I didn't really mean the institution they're coming from. I meant, let's say that person has worked there 5 years ago, and you know darn well they've worked there. It's a no-no to call the colleague and say, hey, Bill, I remember when you worked.
Yes, don't do that.
Absolutely.
Absolutely not.
I'm glad to hear
Because
you
it's
say
not
that.
it's creating bias. Like it's subjective. It's not following the equitable process that we create
Sure.
for every other applicant. So you don't want to, you're really opening it up to a can of worms if you reach out to somebody that is not listed
Yep.
on that as a reference.
Great, I'm very glad I asked that. There's been wishy-washy about whether we could or not before, and I know I have colleagues doing it.
And,
Yeah.
and I actually wanted to follow up on that related to the very first question we got about this, right? Where along the ideas of if you're not a traditional candidate, right, you're coming from outside of the traditional field, and you already are having trouble matching the lingo of the job description to what your experience is. And we all know that our fields are flexible and we can actually incorporate people with diverse experiences, right? But the job description has to be written a certain way and just for reasons outside our control. So if you are, in terms of equity, some candidates are going to have a lot of connections, right, naturally, because they came up through the Ivy Leagues and they had all of the advantages, right? And other candidates are not going to have those connections, and they might actually be the better candidate. So, question?
Hi. So for when my boss listens to the recording, I'm not looking for a job right now. I was wondering if you could speak a little more to the range of experiences that people have or might be expected to go into with checking references, both from the candidate perspective and from the hiring manager perspective. And as a context, I'd like to provide that I was recently asked to be a reference for a person on my team who I don't directly supervise him, but I am one of the leaders for the team. He did go on to get that position. I miss him very much already. He asked me if I would be willing to serve as a reference. I thought about it for an hour or so and then called him back and said, yeah, I'll serve as a reference. It had been a very long time since I'd done that for anybody. And what the reference check in this case ended up being was I was emailed a scroll-worthy list of lots of questions. And I come from the school of why say in 5 words what you could say in 12. So I emailed back a very long email with a paragraph addressing each of their questions. And then after a while I thought about it, and thinking about the person who does directly supervise that candidate, I thought, I know how my colleague who was his supervisor approaches emails, and thought that my colleague would have replied with about 5 words total to that. And I'm just curious, is it more typical for reference checks to be electronic, to be live conversations? Is that something that candidates can ask before they provide their references? Because if I knew that it was going to be a phone call, I might pick a different person than if I knew that they were going to be asked to write a novel about that person. So I'm just curious, I was just surprised by it being an email. It was also a little bit funny because it was obvious that it came from a template that referred to the candidate, and they had gone through and copy pasted, instead of candidate, it was the person's name. So it said the George instead of how is George. Anyway, it was a surreal experience all the way around, and he got the job, so I must not have tanked it for him. But it got me started thinking about, the next time I'm looking for a job, again, boss, not looking for a job. And also the fact that now that I've been in the role that I'm in now for more than 9 years, my list of people farther back in employment, if I don't want to say to my direct supervisor, hey, will you be a reference while I try to leave you? I feel like that's dwindling.
Yeah, so working in academia, I also worked for SAC, which is a government contracting company. I worked for Cisco for a little while, and now at Genelia, they each use a different system for references. Some use like a skill survey where you click a button and it just asks you, rate this candidate on a scale of 1 to 10, and would you hire them again? And you just click. And on the receiving end, as a recruiter, we would aggregate the data and then spit out a percentage and say, yes, we should move forward. Whereas at Genelia, we have that human interaction. We're calling. I just conducted seven reference checks on one person because that's what we ended up doing. But usually it's about 3 reference checks, and that's typical, 3 to 4 reference checks. And it really depends. There's a little gray area as far as how reference checks are done now across different institutions or organizations. I personally like the ability to talk to a human being and to receive that feedback and be able to provide that feedback to a hiring manager to make an informed decision. But I think we're moving more in AI, the direction of AI, where we're going to see a lot more. Everything has to be done quick and efficient, and they're just going to take that human aspect out of it. So I think there's going to be a movement more towards using those like a skill survey-based feedback platform. But it sounds like you were a wonderful reference. Nowhere in the reference checks does it say you have to. Sometimes it would say, please list at least a supervisor or manager. Normally it doesn't say list your current supervisor. And so if it does, and you don't want to, there's always that opportunity to go back to the recruiter and say, I'm currently in this role. I would like to list somebody who was a previous supervisor who currently somewhat supervises me now. Is that perfectly fine as well? So I hope that it's kind of changing throughout each organization and company about how they want to collect the actual feedback on the reference checks.
And then when I'm not applying for a job, after I've been in a role for 10 years, 15 years, is it appropriate to have multiple people who are providing references come from the same team that you're on now? Or are we trying to sample from different perspectives? How broad do I need to go with something like that?
If you've been in a role for quite a long time, that's perfectly fine if they come from the same team or same company. That's, it's really dependent on you. As long as you're providing what the requirements for them to conduct the reference checks are. Yeah, a lot of the references that I completed recently for a candidate was, they were all from the same organization.
Okay. 7 sounds like a lot. Good perseverance.
Oh yeah, thank you.
So we want to be mindful of your time, and we know there is another session at 4:30. We really appreciate that you came to this session, and we hope you got something out of it. Thank you.
Thank you.